Hey everybody, we are going to jump into our fifth unit now, which is all about the First World War. And in this first video, we're going to figure out why World War I happened. So we're going to cover the causes of World War I. So throughout this unit, we're going to figure out not just why the war happened, but kind of how it happened in the sense of like what were the events of the war, how it affected military and civilian alike. We're going to get America involved in this also, and then we're going to look at some of the effects of the war, including we're going to go to Russia and look at a revolution that's going to establish a new country that we call the Soviet Union. So we have a lot of ground to cover in this unit. But again, in the first video, we're just going to focus on the causes. Why did the war happen in the first place? So let's start this off by looking at our first major cause of World War I, which is nationalism. So we did a whole unit on nationalism, if you recall, earlier this year. And nationalism, if you need a reminder, is simply people's pride in their country and in their people that they identify with. So, German nationalism, French nationalism, British, Spanish, Italian, all that stuff. And nationalism is going to be a key ingredient in why World War I happens. So let's get into the details of that. Let's think back to the so-called great powers of Europe. And I've got a list up there for you to look at. Which of those was the newest member of this club? In other words, the most recent country to kind of be elevated to that status. And the answer is Germany. Germany had only been unified since 1871. And so they're a new country. It's a growing country. It's a powerful country, but it's also a country that feels like it doesn't get enough respect, and it wants to prove itself. And so, Germany's eager to show off their strength. And what they greatly fear is Russia to their east. Russia is a big country. It was certainly not as technologically advanced as Germany, but they were industrializing. They were getting more modern. And with their massive population and size and resources, Germany feared that one day Russia would grow to be an overpowering threat. So Germany, basically in their mind, they're thinking, if we have to go to war with Russia, it's better to do it now than later. So they're not exactly looking to avoid a war with Russia and others for that matter. All right, another country we can look at in terms of nationalism would be Britain. Britain had the biggest empire in the world at the time. They had the best navy in the world at the time. And they feel threatened because Germany was spending a lot of money on their military in the years before World War I, especially their navy. And a big German navy is, of course, a direct threat to British independence because Britain relied on their navy to protect them from an invasion. And so with this big German navy getting ever bigger and ever more advanced, Britain's feeling really, really threatened by German growth. All right, now which country would be the most eager to get revenge on Germany? And the answer, of course, is France. So think back to the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. This is that war where Bismarck had basically tricked the French into declaring war on Prussia in the Northern German Confederation, and then all those other German states kind of came along with Prussia as they attacked France, again, out of feelings of nationalism, and France had been humiliated, and they also lost land. This Alsace and Lorraine territory right here, taken by the Germans, and France wanted that land back. They wanted revenge for the humiliating loss in the Franco-Prussian War. All right, on the theme of nationalism, we can also look at Russia, the biggest country in the world. You can see just a little bit of Russia right here. Now, in terms of nationalism, Russians are part of a larger ethnic group called the Slavs. And the Slavs, you can see it in this dark color here on the map, they are, predominant in Eastern Europe. And Russia happens to be the biggest Slavic country. And so they are feeling kind of like this sense of being the big brother of the Slavic world. And they have to look out for their other Slavic brothers, like the Poles or the Czechs or Slovaks, Ukrainians, Serbians, whatever. And Serbia in particular, which is right over here, that is the one that's going to come back to really play a big role in how this war begins. Because Serbia knows Russia's got their back out of feelings of nationalism. All right, as a review back to our nationalism unit, we also remember the Ottoman Empire, the so-called sick man of Europe. And of course, we learned that what was making the Ottoman Empire and its neighbor Austria-Hungary sick was nationalism. These two empires had really seen better days. They frankly are on their decline, and they are not terribly stable. And this area of the world where the two empires meet, so this is the Ottoman Empire, there's Austria-Hungary, the area where they meet, we've referred to this area several times this year already as the Balkans. And the Balkans, if you recall, was so unstable that it was referred to as the powder keg of Europe. In other words, it was a place that could blow up at any moment into a war, and it certainly will. All right, so our second major reason why World War I is going to start is the topic from our last unit, imperialism. And if you recall, imperialism was simply where one country dominates another country, and what we looked at was Europeans going out across the world, building empires across Africa and Asia and other places. And this is going to be, again, another cause of World War I. And the reason was that competition over potential colonies. So at the Berlin Conference, for example, we came up with this way of kind of dividing up Africa to keep the peace among the Europeans. But of course, that peace is always rather shaky. You know, it could always break down because as countries look to gain more power and more land, those competing colonial claims could eventually result in a war between European countries. So in other words, Britain and France might clash over a colony down here, or Germany and Britain might clash over a colony down here somewhere. And so there's always a danger this could happen. In fact, we almost saw a war over Morocco between Germany and France. Things had been kind of calmed down, but it certainly showed the potential for war over these colonies. All right, main idea number 3, and our third reason why World War I is going to happen, it's called militarism. And if you're not sure what militarism means, I've given you some pictures here to look at, and I think visually they really give you a feel for what militarism is all about. And what militarism is the glorification of war and the military. In other words, it's a way of looking at war as being something good and necessary, and basically the idea that the country needs to go to war every once in a while to kind of prove itself, to keep the country strong. And so rather than looking at war as something to be avoided or, basically used as a last resort, war was seen as something glorious and exciting and manly and dashing. And so you have a whole generation of people growing up looking forward to that next war. And this is really the result of the fact that for most of the century between the fall of Napoleon and the beginning of World War I, most European countries really didn't do a lot of major war fighting. And so, frankly, they've kind of forgotten how bad war really is. Now, on that same thought, guys, because war is something that's looked at as, frankly, kind of necessary, but all of these countries across Europe are constantly building up their militaries, spending more and more money. And this is what we call an arms race, where all these countries are getting ready for this potential war. And we see this especially with naval buildup. Battleships were kind of like, almost like the nuclear weapons of today, like these ultimate weapons that show the power of your country. And in 1906, the British introduced a new type of battleship called the Dreadnought. And once this battleship was introduced, it really made all other battleships instantly obsolete. And it really kind of paved the way for this rapid buildup of naval forces across Europe, especially between Germany and Britain. All right, main idea number 4. Let's get into the so-called alliance system. So before World War I, there were 2 major alliances in Europe. The first one was called the Triple Alliance. This was Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. And you might remember that Bismarck had been focused on isolating France, right? Because he knew France would want revenge on Germany. And this Triple Alliance was kind of an attempt to do that, to basically hem France in to where they can't advance outward for fear of dragging all these other countries into war. So there's France. She's looking kind of isolated, and Bismarck here kind of arranging this friendship of sorts. So the second big alliance was called the Triple Entente. And entente is a French word that means understanding, and it refers to, well, it's a little bit more complicated than the Triple Alliance. So at the core, the Triple Entente was a military alliance between France and Russia. So just like Germany, Austria, and Italy were allied, so was France and Russia. Britain was not technically an ally of France or Russia, but they had close ties. So the understanding was that even though Britain may not go to war to defend France or Russia, they're certainly not going to join the other side. So they're either going to remain neutral at any potential war or join on the side of France and Russia. So again, there's very close ties. And if you look at the map, what we have then is a situation which we have a couple of countries right here in the middle and then countries out on the edges that are all basically hostile to one another. Now, I thought I'd show you this picture. It's pretty interesting. You've got Nicholas II here and George V of Russia and Britain, and I got to say they look very similar. Do they not? They look like they're almost brothers or twins. And what you actually would see if you looked at the family trees, so to speak, of these leaders, you would find out that most of the leaders across Europe were related either by blood or marriage. For example, Wilhelm II, or William II of Germany, the Kaiser there, he and George V, the King of England, were both grandchildren of Queen Victoria. Remember Queen Victoria, the one who ruled for so long and all that? And another one of her grandchildren actually went on to marry the Tsar of Russia. So all three of these big time leaders here are all married, or excuse me, they're all related through marriage or blood. Okay, so we have again this kind of this two-armed camp situation, the Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia, Germany, Austria, Italy, and of course the potential for war is pretty massive. So before we talk about why the war actually begins, let's go back and review those four main causes. And a great way to remember this is the acronym MAIN. Okay, what does that refer to? Well, it refers to militarism, the alliance system, imperialism, and nationalism. So again, if you ever have to remember, which of course you will, what the main causes of World War I were, just think MAIN: militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism. Okay, so with those four main causes, we have a continent, that is to say Europe, that is prone to a war, but the war is not inevitable, right? Something has to happen to trigger all of those other things to actually make a war happen. And so let's now focus on that spark, and it's going to involve something called Serbia and Austria and Bosnia. All right, let's get into the details here. It's going to involve an assassination as well. So the background on this was this area called Serbia had been part of the Ottoman Empire, and then they gained their independence, and they were an independent Slavic nation. And they had a big rivalry with Austria. Austria, of course, is much stronger than Serbia, but nonetheless there was a rivalry over who's going to dominate the rest of the area right through here, particularly this area called Bosnia. So Bosnia, like Serbia, had been part of the Ottoman Empire, and then they gained basically independence, if you want to call it that. In other words, they kind of broke away, and Serbia and Austria both had their sights on Bosnia, like who's going to get this land? Well, Austria occupied it, but in Bosnia was a very large Serbian minority. So you have Serbian people who live over here and, of course, in Serbia. And so when Austria took this land over, Serbia was furious. And the Serbians inside Bosnia were especially upset. And they decided they were going to take action against Austria. And so the moment comes in June of 1914 when the Austrian Archduke, a guy named Franz Ferdinand, was visiting Sarajevo, which is a city that's the capital of Bosnia. Now, when he arrives, he goes and does a little speech and ceremony type thing, and as he was heading back, he is going to be shot and killed by an assassin named Gavrilo Princip. Now, Gavrilo Princip was a Serbian nationalist, and the reason he shot the Archduke Franz Ferdinand is because as Archduke, he was next in line to the throne of Austria. So this was going to be a very provocative action, of course. By the way, he also ended up killing Sophie, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand's wife. So Principe is going to kill both of these people. All right, that's the car that Franz Ferdinand was riding around in. Notice how it was open-topped. In fact, if you look right here, this is actually a bullet hole in the side of the car. There's your assassin. He was only 19 at the time. Again, he's a Serbian nationalist who is now a terrorist and an assassin who's killed the Archduke of Austria. A couple different views of the assassination. Again, there's Franz Ferdinand. There's his wife Sophie. They were both fatally wounded. There is Franz Ferdinand's jacket that he was wearing when he was assassinated. Rather odd thing to keep around, but there it is on display. There is the Archduke and Sophie, both laying in state as mourners pass by. Now, Austria has just lost its Archduke to a Serbian nationalist. Their response, well, as you can imagine, is one of anger against Serbia. So Austria goes ahead and declares war exactly a month after that assassination. They declare war on Serbia. Now, one of the reasons they pushed Serbia so hard and went to war is that Germany was going to back up Austria. In fact, Germany is almost encouraging Austria to be tough on Serbia. Now, this is where the alliance system causes a regional war to become a continental war. Because remember, Austria can call on Germany as an ally. Serbia can call on Russia and France as allies. And so what happens is the whole continent begins to kind of collapse in on itself, and you have a massive war. Now, everybody in this war sees themselves as a victim, that they're not the aggressor, they're just reacting to somebody else. So, as I said, Russia is going to back up Serbia. What they do is they don't immediately declare war on Austria, but they take they're one step away from that. They mobilize their military. What that means is they're going to call up all the reserves. So millions of Russian men are going to be called back into the military. They're going to get their uniforms and weapons and all that stuff. And this is, of course, a greatly provocative act, because once a military is mobilized, it's ready to be used. And so you can imagine Austria is feeling the pressure from this, but also, of course, Germany. In fact, Germany doesn't wait around for a declaration of war. Once Russia mobilizes, Germany sees it as a virtual declaration of war, and then they declare war on Russia on August 1st, 1914. 2 days later, Germany declares war on Russia's ally, France. So now we've got major countries all going to war. Now, if you look at the picture here, we have a picture of Germans who are hearing the news that Germany is going to war, and you can clearly tell that they're not somber about this at all. They're looking forward to this. Remember, militarism was a major cause of World War I, after all, and they're excited to get this war on. And most people across Europe assumed this would be a brief war. They had no idea what was actually going to unfold. Here's another interesting picture of a crowd in Germany hearing the news of the declaration of war. And years later, someone was looking over this photograph of this German crowd, and they noticed a familiar face in the crowd. And that, of course, is Adolf Hitler. So Hitler at this time was just another face in the crowd, really a nobody. But, of course, he'll go on to affect German history in a big way in World War II. Now, think about Germany. What major problem are they going to face in a major war? And, of course, the answer is they have to fight what's known as a two-front war. They've got France and Russia to deal with. So Germany was not unaware of this problem. In fact, they had a plan to deal with it. It's called the Schlieffen Plan, named for the guy who came up with this plan. And the Schlieffen Plan was both simple and complex at the same time. On the simple side, it's just a plan to win this war by taking out France first and then taking on the Russians second. So the way this is going to work is Germany was under the assumption that Russia would take a long time to get its army fully mobilized, fully ready to go for a war, because Russia's big, but they're also slow and lumbering, and their industry is just not at the same level as Germany. So Germany felt comfortable with leaving a small force in the east to defend against Russia and sending the bulk of their army to take on France. Now, to get to France, the most quick way, they're going to have to go through Belgium. Okay, so the plan was sweep through Belgium in this lightning strike, sweep around, capture Paris, knock France out of the war. Then that army can then be redeployed eastward to take on the Russians, which would be advancing from this direction. Okay, now this is a very ambitious plan. It's got to work perfectly. The timing has to be excellent. And if it doesn't work perfectly, basically the whole plan falls apart. And again, there's the author of this plan, Alfred von Schlieffen. Okay, it's called the Schlieffen Plan. Now, there are the Germans on the attack. And if we go back to the map just one more time, we're going to notice something interesting about Belgium. They are neutral, right? In other words, they're not part of any alliance at all. And Germany had asked permission from Belgium to pass through their country to attack France. Belgium refused, and so Germany invaded anyways. Now, this is going to have a major consequence, and that consequence is Britain, remember, who had basically, they were friends with France, but not necessarily allied with France. Once Germany goes through Belgium, Britain says enough is enough, and they go ahead and declare war on Germany. So think about Germany's position at this point. They are at war with Russia, Belgium, France, and Britain. Okay, and they got to take all of those countries on at the same time. All right, so before we get into any more details of the war, which will come in our next video, let's do a quick recap, guys. Remember the main causes, that's militarism, the alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. The Triple Alliance would have been that would have been Germany and Austria and Italy, and the Triple Entente was France and Britain and Russia. And the Schlieffen Plan was Germany's idea of going through Belgium to knock out France quickly, and then turn their army around to take on Russia and then knock them out. All right, I know that was a lot of information, guys, in one video, but we covered a lot of ground, and we know why World War I happened. In future videos, we're going to talk about how the war unfolds and what made World War I a new type of war.